So I was recently browsing through my Lightroom library looking for an image that I wanted to use in one of these videos when I saw a collection of unedited panoramic photos that I stitched together on several landscape shoots over the years. And as I took that little trip down memory lane while looking at those photos, I realized that it would actually make a great video. So in most cases, we turn to Panos when we want to present our viewers with sweeping vistas that we couldn't easily capture in a single shot. So we either take a series of images to stitch together in post, or we use the Pano feature in our smartphone camera apps. But there's more nuance to why you'd want to consider shooting photos with the intent to stitch them in Panos later on. And that's what I want to cover here. So let's dive in. All right, so here we are in Lightroom Desktop. And what I want to do is I want to explain kind of three reasons why I use Panos or why I shoot for Panos. And to some of you, it might be like totally obvious, but I'm willing to bet that there are others who hadn't considered these reasons. Because like I said, I think for the most part, for a lot of photographers, Panos is usually just this, and you're just going like this with the Pano feature on your phone. And that's totally fine. But there's so much more to it and a lot more leverage depending on how you shoot. So for me, especially as I've gotten older, especially over the past, I don't know, call it 5 years, my landscape photography has morphed from where I used to always use the widest possible lenses that I had, like a 16 to 35 or a 12 to 24. As I've gotten older, though, I've kind of moved further down the focal range where I really appreciate longer focal length. So whether it's a long prime lens or a long telephoto zoom lens, like a 100 to 400 or a 70 to 200, using that with my landscapes, it forces me to really slow down and pay attention instead of just like using an ultra wide lens where everything just fits in. But with that said, this first reason of why I use Panos is sometimes I want the best of both worlds. So let me show you what I mean. All right, so here I've got the set of 10 images. I'm just going to walk you through them. This is actually kind of interesting because this illustrates a technique where it's a multi-row pano. So if I double click here, you can see as I go from left to right, you can see that the camera is going from left to right. But then as I reach here, I go down. I shift the camera down, and then I go from right to left. So really quickly, it just kind of goes like this. So first row, left to right, second row, right to left. And the reason why I do this is because it allows me to kind of get a wide angle-esque composition, even though I'm using a long lens. So if you look here in the info view, this was taken with the Sony A7R Mark III and the Zeiss Bodice 135 f2.8. So 135 millimeters is a pretty long focal length for landscapes. And again, let's look at this image here. Let me go ahead and close the film strip. You can see at 135 millimeters, this is what you get. Now, try to picture as best as you can if I were to put this camera horizontally. I would get a little bit more space over here, but I probably wouldn't get much further than down here. Like I certainly wouldn't get the foliage in the foreground. And the thing that I like about it is that you can see when I stitch them together, the foliage is here and it's out of focus because we've got this beautiful lens compression. The camera was focused back here on the rock, which you can see is here nice and sharp. And this is already edited. If I hit the backslash key, you can see that's the stitched unedited photo. But basically what you get here is this beautiful wide angle-esque kind of shot. I think you'd agree this looks pretty wide angle, but you still get this beautiful compression. If I were to use, say, an actual like 24 millimeter or even a 35 millimeter lens, what would happen is all of this stuff would be in frame, but it would look further away and there would be less separation between the foreground and the background. The foliage here in the foreground would be a little bit more sharp, and the background would also be kind of sharp. And so you wouldn't have this kind of sense of depth and distance and relationship. And what I mean by relationship is relationship in terms of the actual size of these mountains. Again, you can look over here. These are all these kind of trees along the side. Trees, you can get an idea of how tall they are. And so when you look at that, and then you look at just how huge this peak is, it gives you a sense of relationship in terms of size and scale. And so all I did with these 10 photos, these were unedited photos You don't need to, if you do a multi-row panel, you don't need to do anything special. Lightroom will figure it out. You just right click, you then go to photo merge, and then you go to panoramic merge. And so you can see this is the full uncropped image. The one that I showed you, I already cropped in, and I'll show you that in a second. But look at all of this information that you get. And so I'll go ahead and cancel out of this. And again, if I go to edit and I hit the backslash key, this is the basically just the stitched image. And then here's what I did to edit it. Now, if you're interested in seeing an editing workflow with any of the photos in this video, leave a comment below and maybe they'll make a fun video in the future. Now, for the second reason why I like to shoot panos, this is probably the most obvious one. Compression is definitely a really nice one when you are using a long lens to kind of create a wide angle shot. That I think you're getting the best of both worlds. But the other reason number two, super obvious, but also very important. And that is often with your panos, you're going to get an increased resolution image. So you can have a single exposure with, say, one focal length, and then you can create almost the exact same composition with multiple exposures that are stitched together. Again, you get, it almost looks the same, except the pano will look a little bit, maybe a little bit wider. And again, you might have a compression difference, but you're going to have a lot more resolution. So let me show you what I mean by that. All right, so here you can see just from the thumbnail, basically the same photo taken at the Dolomites in Italy. This is a single exposure image. If I open up the info view, let's just take a look really quickly. This was taken with my Sony a7 Mark III with the 24 to 70 millimeter f2.8 lens at 60 millimeters, or actually technically 59 millimeters. Now you can see that the a7 Mark III has a 24 megapixel sensor, which is fine. And in most cases, I mean, it's great. You can zoom in here. This is at 100%, and you have a lot of good information. Now, if resolution is really important to you, like let's say you know you're going to print this huge, you want room to crop, and you want room to basically have a large print. Well, the first thing you would do is you would probably use a camera that has a larger sensor, but that's not even that necessary. Here, you can see here, this was taken with my A7R Mark III, so a larger sensor. And it was also taken with the Sony 100 to 400 millimeter lens. This has become one of my favorite landscape lenses. It was taken at 100 millimeters, so it was fully zoomed out. But if we look at the pano stitch here, you can see, again, this is the raw resolution of each individual image. And so as I step through, you can see all I did was I had the camera vertically on the tripod and I panned over and took my shots here. Now let's go ahead and go back to grid and open up the pano. So this is the stitched pano. And so you can see if I select the pano image, I mean, massive, massive resolution. In fact, if you were to multiply these two values, basically this would be a 118 megapixel image. So if we select these two images here and then go to compare, let's go ahead again, let's drop film strip and let's close the info panel. So here, this becomes really evident when we start zooming in. So let's say I go ahead in here and I zoom in. You can see just how much more detail we have, how much closer we can zoom in. And this has a lot of practical applications, again, in terms of cropping and printing. As we kind of pan over, you can see just how much more information there is in the image. Now, I totally get that comparing a single A7 III 24 megapixel exposure versus a pano taken with an A7R series camera, which has a much higher resolution sensor, not exactly fair, but you would still get similar results if you were to take the A7 III with its 24 megapixel sensor and take multiple images and stitch them together. You would still get a higher resolution image when you stitch them into a pano. So try not to focus too much, yes, on the fact that there are two different cameras. Just know that if you do need more resolution, one of the best ways to do that is to stitch them. And you don't even have to go super wide. Oftentimes I'll do something that is equivalent to like maybe like a 4x3 or even just a square. I'll just take 4 images in, 2 rows and stitch that together. And that will give me a much higher resolution image than if I just took a single exposure. So again, the idea of using panos to stitch together, especially if you're printing, again, as we pan around, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous here. Like, look how much closer if we compare the peak over here to up here. All right, so for the third and final reason why I like using Panos, it actually has to do with this. And I mentioned this earlier often, and I think we're all not guilty is not the right word, but we all very often just switch to the Pano mode in our camera app, and we just, do that thing where we're kind of panning the camera around. That's fine. In a pinch, that's fine. If you just need to get like a sweeping expanse, do it. The thing is that if you're like, using your iPhone or your Android phone and you're out there like taking serious photos, so to speak, you'll get a lot more benefit out of taking individual exposures, treating this as you would your regular camera. So in this case, it would be vertical photos where you're using some sort of a pro camera, or at the very least, you're locking your focus and your exposure with the stock camera app. So with the pro camera, you often can lock in your ISO and your shutter speed and your white balance. You can also shoot in regular Bayer RAW as opposed to using Pro RAW. Or in the case of the Pano, you're getting a JPEG. So there's a lot more flexibility in terms of just photographing multiple DNG files as I have here. So I was in Arches National Park here, and this is obviously balanced rock. This is a very famous geological formation. If you ever find yourself in Arches or in the area, definitely check it out. But you can see here, if I open up the film strip, this is the stack. And as I go through, all I did was I had my camera on a tripod and I just panned it over and took these photos. Now, I could have totally taken a Pano with the stock camera app, but I feel like the results would be, they wouldn't be as strong. Again, if we look at these images here, let me open up the info view. This is a DNG file. It was taken with the telephoto lens, the 5X lens on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now, granted, it's only 12 megapixels, which is fine, but it's really great when you actually combine them together. Because in practice, this is actually a 51 megapixel image. What I did was I took all of these 12 megapixel images and I combined them together here. And so when I open this up here and I zoom in, you can see all of this great detail in the image. And with 51 megapixels, it gives me plenty of room to crop and to edit. So you can see this is the unedited photo. This is what I edited with. It's not even fully done. I still have more things that I want to do, to be honest. But I know that I have way more latitude in terms of my editing by using these 8 DNG files and then combining them to this, as opposed to just using the stock Pano feature in the camera app. I know that when we think of Panos, we instantly think of just those sweeping vistas. But my hope is that with these 3 different reasons of why I use Panos, outside of just getting this super wide shot, I hope it kind of gets you excited to give it a shot. Like, especially using the telephoto lens or using a longer focal length than what you maybe typically use when you're out in, say, doing landscape photography. Put on the longer focal length, take a few of your brackets and stitch them together and see if maybe the results are better. Take a photo with a wide lens and compare the two, and you'll see, I think you'll see there's a lot more benefit to using a longer focal length and stitching them together. Of course, also, you've got your iPhone. I mean, we use these all the time. And the raw capabilities with this camera, they're really impressive and they keep getting better. So again, unless you're in a rush and you just want to get a quick Pano, do it. But then slow down, open up either a pro camera app or just even the stock camera app, set it to RAW, and then take a few of those vertical shots with, say, about 20 or 30% overlap, and then see what the results are. And again, then take just a single kind of wide angle shot with the iPhone and compare the two. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. So Pano is just like one of the little things. It's one small component of Lightroom. There's tons. And if you want to learn everything there is to know about Lightroom Desktop, Lightroom Mobile, and Lightroom Web, which is the cloud ecosystem of Lightroom, then please do check out my course called Lightroom Everywhere. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. I've also got this playlist here with tons of Lightroom tutorials, so you can even just check that out. If you found this video helpful, a thumbs up is greatly appreciated. And please be sure to click on the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.